To get started, I'd like to introduce you to our dog, Thunder. He is the gentlest, most lovable, adorable pet any family could want to own. I know, your critters are the most lovable, adorable pets that any family could want to have, and your kids are the most adorable, lovable kids on the planet, too. So we'll just hold our thoughts and our feelings about who has the most adorable pets and children to ourselves. Now back to my family pet, Thunder. Here's a picture of him. And this is what he had to say when I told him I was going to be talking about him today. We're not just talking about him, but talking about his bodily functions. For those of you who've been convinced by your children that they need a family pet, and they promise and swear that they'll take care of it, they'll love it, they'll clean up after it, they'll feed it, well, they usually do. Sometimes only for a day or two, or until they grow tired of it, which is sometimes a day or two. And if they are real good about taking care of them, well, eventually they leave home. They go away to college, they move out on their own, and they don't always take their pets with them. When that happens, we're left to take care of what's left. Now, part of taking care of a pet, one the size of Thunder, who stands taller than my 5'2" frame on his hind legs, weighs 110 pounds, thinks he's a lap dog, is cleaning up their poop messes. And when you have a dog as big as Thunder, they make pretty big piles of poop. Now this summer I was out in the backyard with my bag and my plastic gloved hand, and I was bent over a palm-sized pile of poop, picking it up, when I discovered a 4-leaf clover. And then I discovered another, and then another. And when I found that third 4-leaf clover, this thought went off in my head: I'm a lucky, lucky girl. That thought transported me back to a day in 1990 when I sat across the room from my OBGYN 6 weeks after delivering my first son. And he said to me, "You're lucky we were able to give you a bikini cut." And as he said that to me, I remember looking at him thinking, how could he think I was lucky? How could he say that I'm lucky? And as he talked, I kept thinking, don't you remember me? Don't you know who I am? Don't you know? Don't you remember that I'm the girl whose baby died? You see, I'd spent 9 months pregnant. I'd had a picture-perfect pregnancy, not a day of morning sickness, no food cravings, nothing. I worked right up until the day I went into labor, and everything went according to all the books, all the Lamaze classes. Everything went right on schedule. But there were unexpected problems during delivery. My son aspirated on his meconium, which is the baby's first stool. He went into distress, and they noticed this. They did an emergency C-section, and all I remember is a flurry of activity when the nurse left. I remember the doctor coming back in and breaking my water. My husband remembers him saying, "It looks like pea soup in there." Next thing I know, I was coming out of anesthesia, and I said, "Where's my baby?" And all I remember before things went dark again is someone saying to me, "I'm sorry, he didn't make it." Now, someone once told me that when you perform surgery on somebody, you need to allow time to close it up. And what I found during all these years is that when we talk about the loss of a child, it is like performing surgery. Our society calls the loss of a child the worst loss. And that's a whole different conversation. But honestly, I think that just exacerbates the problems for people who have lost a child. But getting back to that day, I sat across the room from him, and I'm thinking, how can you call me lucky? And I went through all of the normal grieving processes, and I spent years trying to figure out why me? Was I being punished? What had I done wrong? What had I missed? And my doctor sat there, and he called me lucky. Now, I've always said that I never had a problem conceiving. I used to joke that all Warren had to do was look at me and boop, bun in the oven. But it turns out that I did have a problem staying pregnant. 3 months after Gavin died, according to what my doctor had said, I was able to conceive, and I conceived immediately. But in the beginning of the second trimester, I miscarried, even after an ultrasound that showed a strong heartbeat, and the doctor told me that the chances of miscarriage had decreased to 4%. I waited, just as my doctor said, and immediately got pregnant again. But this pregnancy was totally different. Right from the onset, I had morning sickness, morning, noon, and night for 5.5 months. Smells bothered me, tastes bothered me, certain foods bothered me. I ended up developing hypertension and spent 2 months in and out of the hospital with repeated stress tests. Some nights I'd stay and then I'd go home. Some nights I'd be there overnight and then I'd go home. Sometimes I was there for a couple of days before I was able to leave. And in the last 2 weeks, I was there full time. This boy was not coming early, and when toxemia started, the doctors did do a C-section. He was a healthy, bouncy baby boy and has been ever since. 15 months later, just according to my plan and schedule, I was back in the doctor's office after a pink stripe showed up on the home pregnancy test. But 3 months later, in the beginning of the second trimester, I miscarried. 90 days later, just as my doctor instructed me to wait, I began trying to conceive another child. And then I began to really worry when I didn't get pregnant right away. But this time around, all it took was an additional 90 days. With this pregnancy, mild hypertension set in around the 8th month, but it never turned into toxemia. And a week before my daughter's due date, I was able to deliver her naturally, despite the previous 2 C-sections. Everything went well until after that delivery, when a piece of the placenta would not detach. My doctor worked and worked and worked. There was talk of a hysterectomy, but he was finally successful in removing the piece of placenta. My husband had entered the room afterwards and said it looked like a bloodbath. Now, my doctor wanted to know after that delivery if we were going to tie my tubes. He told me that my body, both physically and emotionally, had been through too much in recent years, and I really should consider it. But after my oldest living son was born, I had decided that 2 children wasn't going to be enough. I wanted 4. And I figured that I was not going to make a permanent decision until I could decide what I wanted to do, so I went on birth control. And I joke that my youngest son got tired of waiting for us to make up our minds, because while I was on birth control, I conceived. That pregnancy was picture perfect. No morning sickness, no troubles, no toxemia, no hypertension. I worked right up until the time he was born. And it's surprising that there weren't any problems, because during that time I was pretty sure that my husband and my best friend were having an affair. And 6 weeks before that delivery, that affair was confirmed. But there didn't seem to affect my pregnancy, and I delivered this boy naturally, and that's when things went awry, because when he was born, the doctors noticed that he wasn't breathing. That boy spent 4 days in NICU with tubes and wires all over his body, but that was the end of it. And lucky we have all been, because he has been healthy as a horse ever since. And there's that word, luck. Now, I've always been a believer that we can make lemonade from lemons, and that this thing called luck does exist. But I believe that we have to keep our minds open to the possibility, and we have to keep our eyes peeled for this thing called luck. And one of the things that I realized in my healing process after Gavin died is this. When Gavin was born, I had a different doctor. And when I had the miscarriage, I had that same doctor. But during Gavin's delivery, when they made the code blue call, The local perinatologist, which is the high-risk doctor, just happened to be in the hospital, in the library, on the labor and delivery floor, and he responded to that code blue. So he was there when Gavin was delivered. And after that first miscarriage, when the doctor did not refer me to the high-risk specialist, my boss said to me, "You really should call them." But they only took referrals. So I called their office, I explained my situation, and as it turns out, he remembered being there with Gavin. He requested my records, and they phoned me the next day and accepted me as a patient. And I have often said that if it weren't for him, my 3 children wouldn't be here because of all the troubles that we had. We were very, very blessed to have him, and it was just a sheer stroke of luck that he was there that day that I went into labor with Gavin. To wrap things up, we're going to go back to my dog, to Thunder, to that day that I was in the yard picking up those palm-sized piles of crap and had that epiphany that I'm a lucky, lucky girl. During that event, I not only found those 3 four-leaf clovers, but I found this. I found 8 four-leaved clovers and 1 five-leaf clover in a space no bigger than the bottom of my pie plate. Now that's a whole lot of luck mixed in with a whole lot of shit. Where will you find your next random stroke of luck? Until next time, take care and remember, we are neighbors in grief and allies in healing.